Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving headfirst into Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah.
A 14th century text?
Yeah,
That's like the
it really is.
grandfather of history, sociology, and political theory all rolled into one.
Yeah.
You've really brought a treasure trove of excerpts.
I tried.
Enough to give us a real feel for this incredibly dense but insightful work.
Yeah, it's not exactly light reading.
It's not.
So our mission today is to pull out the most important ideas.
Right.
The surprising facts. The stuff that'll make you go, wait, they were thinking about that back then.
What's fascinating is that even though it was written centuries ago, so many of Ibn Khaldun's observations about human behavior and how societies work are still incredibly relevant today.
It's like he was peering into the future.
Yeah.
Okay, so first things first, for those who haven't spent their nights poring over 14th century manuscripts, what exactly is the Muqaddimah?
Yeah.
The title translates to Introduction to History,
Right.
but it feels like so much more than that.
You hit the nail on the head. It's more like a foundational text, the bedrock of his thinking.
Okay.
Ibn Khaldun outlines his whole philosophy of history, how civilizations rise and fall, how the environment shapes culture, the whole dance of power.
It's mind-blowing.
It's mind-blowing.
And he dives into this concept of Asabiyyah,
Yes.
which sounds super complex, but is basically the glue that holds societies together, right?
Exactly. It's this idea of group feeling, the kind of intense solidarity you see in, say, a tight-knit family or a tribe that's been through thick and thin together. Ibn Khaldun believed it was the secret sauce for any society's success.
That makes me think about those incredible underdog sports stories where a team with less talent but tons of heart ends up winning it all.
Yes.
Could that be Asabiyyah at work in a way?
Totally. That's a perfect example. It's that intangible element of shared purpose and intense loyalty that can propel a group to achieve incredible things.
Wow.
Ibn Khaldun was really onto something.
So to understand where these ideas came from,
Yeah.
we need to understand Ibn Khaldun himself.
Absolutely.
He wasn't just some scholar in an ivory tower.
Absolutely not. He lived through a period of intense political upheaval, saw empires crumble firsthand in North Africa and Spain.
Really?
He worked for rulers, witnessed cultural shifts,
Wow.
and even got thrown in jail at one point.
I didn't know about the jail time.
Talk about a life experience that shapes your worldview.
So he wasn't just theorizing about power, he was living it.
Exactly.
And see how that would lead him to think about these big sweeping patterns in history.
Precisely. And he was a keen observer, always connecting the dots.
Yeah.
He even created this detailed geographical survey of the known world, linking the climate and geography of a place to the very character of its people.
Wait, like he thought where you lived determined what kind of person you were.
Ah.
That's getting into some controversial territory.
It is, and it's a bit of a foreshadowing of some later ideas that would be considered problematic. But for Ibn Khaldun, it was about observing patterns, seeing how the harshness of the desert, for example, might shape a nomadic tribe's values and social structure.
Okay, so now let's get to the heart of his most famous idea that civilizations aren't meant to last forever.
Right.
It's like a constant cycle of growth, peaking, and then crash.
Yeah.
Kind of depressing when you think about it.
It can seem that way.
Yeah.
But Ibn Khaldun believed understanding this cycle was actually key to potentially breaking free from it. He describes how civilizations go through these phases.
Okay.
First, there's the surge of Asabiyyah,
Uh-huh.
then the conquest of power, a golden age of leisure and tranquility, but then things start to go downhill.
That's the part that always gets me. How can a civilization be at its peak and still start to crumble?
Right.
It's like that saying the only way to go from the top is down.
Right. And Ibn Khaldun was very specific about why that happens.
Okay.
He argued that luxury and ease, the very things that come with success, start to eat away at the Asabiyyah that got them there in the first place. People get comfortable, lose their fighting spirit, become more individualistic, and boom, the cracks start to show.
It's almost like the things we think we want, comfort wealth,
Yeah.
a life of ease,
Right.
can be our undoing, makes you think twice about that whole hustle culture mentality, right?
It definitely makes you pause and consider the trade-offs.
Yeah.
Ibn Khaldun even suggested that the more luxurious a dynasty becomes, the more likely it is to rely on outsiders for defense, weakening its core strength even further.
It's kind of like a sports team that gets complacent after winning a championship and starts relying on big-name free agents instead of developing its own talent.
Yes.
Eventually, the heart of the team is gone, and they crumble from within.
Exactly. You're connecting Ibn Khaldun's ideas to the modern world in a way that I think he'd appreciate.
I hope so.
It shows how his observations about human behavior and social dynamics are still incredibly relevant, even if the specific contexts have changed. And it really highlights how timeless those observations are. He was able to tap into something fundamental about how societies function, regardless of the era.
So if Asabiyyah is this powerful force,
Hmm.
it makes me wonder, where does it come from in the first place? Is it something you're born with, or can it be cultivated?
That's the million-dollar question. Ibn Khaldun believed that Asabiyyah was strongest in nomadic desert-dwelling tribes, groups that had to rely on each other for survival in these harsh environments.
Right.
It's like their way of life forged these incredibly tight bonds.
That makes sense when your very existence depends on the group. There's no room for individualism or petty squabbles.
Yeah.
You sink or swim together.
Exactly. And he contrasted that with the weaker Asabiyyah he observed in more settled urban populations where people had more individual freedom and less dependence on the group for survival.
Right.
It's almost like the comforts of civilization can, in a way, weaken those bonds.
It's like the difference between a close-knit family running a small business together, where everyone's pitching in and knows that stakes are high, versus a giant corporation where people are more focused on climbing the ladder and looking out for themselves.
Perfect analogy, and I think that's something that resonates even today as societies become more complex and individualistic. How do we maintain that sense of shared purpose and responsibility that Ibn Khaldun saw as so crucial?
It's a big question, and one that I bet a lot of our listeners are grappling with, whether it's in their workplaces, communities, or even families. Figuring out how to build and maintain those strong bonds is a challenge we all face.
Ibn Khaldun would probably say it's something we need to be intentional about. It's not something that just happens automatically, especially in the kind of world we live in today.
Now, I know we've been focusing on the cyclical rise and fall of dynasties, but the Muqaddimah isn't just a political treatise.
Right.
He covers so much ground: economics, philosophy, even the arts. It's almost overwhelming.
It's true. He had this incredibly wide-ranging intellect, and one of the things I find most fascinating is how he integrates religion into his analysis. Remember, he was a devout Muslim,
Right.
but he didn't shy away from acknowledging the influence of other faiths throughout history.
So he wasn't just looking at religion through an Islamic lens. He was trying to understand its broader role in shaping societies, regardless of the specific belief system.
Exactly. And for Ibn Khaldun, religion was this incredibly powerful force for unifying people, strengthening Asabiyyah, and even legitimizing rulers.
Interesting.
He pointed to the rise of Islamic empires as a prime example of how religious fervor could propel a group to achieve incredible things.
It makes me think about some of the social movements we see today, where people are motivated by a deep sense of moral conviction, whether it's fighting for climate justice or advocating for social equality.
Yeah,
There's a kind of asabiyyah in those movements, even if it's not tied to a specific religion.
absolutely. You're drawing these really insightful connections. Ibn Khaldun was observing how religion could fuel collective action and inspire incredible feats of courage and sacrifice.
But he wasn't naive about the potential downsides of religion either, right?
Oh, not at all. He saw how easily religious fervor could turn into fanaticism, intolerance, and even violence if it wasn't tempered by reason and justice. He believed religious leaders had a huge responsibility to promote peace and understanding.
It's like that old saying, fire's a good servant, but a bad master. Religion can be this incredible force for good, but it can also be incredibly destructive if it's wielded in the wrong way.
Right, and I think that's a message that resonates really strongly today, given all the conflicts and divisions we see in the world, often fueled by religious extremism.
Yeah.
Ibn Khaldun was urging people to think critically about the role of religion and to guard against its potential for misuse.
So he wasn't advocating for a purely secular society, but he was also wary of giving religion unchecked power. It's like he was searching for that balance between faith and reason.
Exactly. He believed both were essential for a healthy society. It's fascinating how he grapples with these big questions about the role of faith in public life, questions that we're still wrestling with today.
And it wasn't just religion that caught his attention. This guy was all over the map. Intellectually. You mentioned economics earlier. What kind of economic ideas was he kicking around back in the 14th century?
Well, he wouldn't have used terms like supply and demand or gross domestic product,
Right.
but he was definitely observing and analyzing the basic principles of economics, centuries before Adam Smith made them famous.
Hmm.
He talks about trade, the division of labor, the impact of government policies. He even understood the importance of a stable currency.
Hold on. He was worried about inflation back then.
He was.
That feels incredibly relatable right now with everything costing an arm and a leg.
He saw how fluctuations in the value of money could destabilize an economy, disrupt trade, and hurt ordinary people. He even gave advice to rulers about the dangers of excessive taxation. He was basically saying, don't kill the goose that lays the golden egg.
Sounds like pretty solid advice even for today's politicians. So he wasn't just some ivory tower intellectual. He was thinking about practical solutions to real-world problems.
Exactly. And he did this by drawing on his vast knowledge of history, his understanding of human nature, and his keen observations of the world around him. It's really quite impressive.
You know, it strikes me that Ibn Khaldun was doing something that's become incredibly popular today, connecting the dots between different fields of knowledge. He wasn't just a historian or a sociologist or an economist. He was all of those things, and he was able to synthesize those perspectives into this incredibly insightful worldview.
You're right. He was a true polymath way ahead of his time, and I think that's one of the reasons his work still resonates today. He reminds us that knowledge isn't compartmentalized to truly understand the world. We need to be able to connect the dots to see how history, politics, economics, culture, and even religion all interact and influence each other.
It's like he was saying, hey, don't just specialize in one tiny corner of knowledge. Look at the bigger picture, see how it all fits together.
Exactly, and that's a message that I think is more important than ever in our increasingly complex and interconnected world.
Speaking of connecting the dots, I'm curious about Ibn Khaldun's personal journey. We've talked about his experiences in politics and how they shaped his thinking. But what about his education and intellectual development? What kind of training did he have that led him to become this groundbreaking thinker?
Well, he was born into a prominent family in Seville, Spain,
Okay.
a family that valued scholarship and had a long history of involvement in politics. It's like he was destined for greatness from the start.
Sounds like he had a pretty privileged upbringing. Did he go to some fancy 14th century university?
He did receive a traditional Islamic education, studying the Quran, Islamic law, Arabic grammar, and logic. But he also had these amazing teachers who exposed him to a wide range of subjects, including philosophy, history, and literature.
Wow.
He was soaking it all up like a sponge.
It's like he was building this massive mental library, pulling from all these different sources to inform his thinking.
Right.
It reminds me of how important it is to expose ourselves to diverse perspectives and ideas.
Absolutely. And Ibn Khaldun wasn't just passively absorbing information.
Right.
He was actively engaging with it, questioning assumptions, debating with his teachers, and formulating his own unique understanding of the world.
So he wasn't just a product of his education. He was taking what he learned and forging his own path.
Exactly. And it's this independent spirit, this willingness to challenge conventional wisdom that I think makes him such an inspiring figure.
Now, considering his family's political connections, it's no surprise that he was drawn to public service. What were some of his early experiences in that realm?
Well, he started his career in his early 20s,
Good.
working for various rulers in North Africa.
Okay.
He served as a secretary, a diplomat, even a judge.
Wow.
He was right there in the thick of it, witnessing firsthand the machinations of power and the complexities of governing.
Talk about a crash course in real politics.
Right.
I can only imagine the stories he could tell about the intrigues and betrayals he must have witnessed.
I know it's like something out of Game of Thrones, but set in the 14th century Islamic world.
I bet those experiences gave him some seriously valuable insights into human nature and the motivations that drive people, especially those in positions of power.
Absolutely. And you can see those insights reflected throughout the Muqaddimah.
Yeah.
He wasn't just some armchair theorist. He was drawing on real-world experiences to inform his analysis.
Now, I know his life wasn't all smooth sailing. He faced his share of challenges and setbacks.
You're right. He lived in a turbulent time marked by political instability and constant power struggles. He even ended up in prison at one point, accused of plotting against a ruler.
Wow. Talk about a career hazard. But it's amazing that he was able to bounce back from those setbacks and continue his intellectual pursuits.
It speaks to his resilience and his unwavering passion for knowledge. And eventually he found a more stable position in Egypt,
Okay.
where he was able to focus on his writing and teaching.
That must have been a relief after all the drama and intrigue of court life. Did you find a welcoming intellectual community in Egypt?
He did. Cairo at that time was a major center of Islamic learning and culture. He was appointed as a professor at the prestigious Al-Azhar Mosque,
Wow.
where he lectured on a wide range of subjects. It's like he finally found a place where he could truly flourish intellectually.
So the Muqaddimah, this groundbreaking work that we've been diving into, was born out of his experiences, his scholarship, and his time in this vibrant intellectual hub of Cairo.
Exactly. It's the culmination of his life's work, a testament to his brilliance and his enduring legacy as one of the greatest thinkers of the Islamic world.
It's inspiring to think about how his work, written centuries ago in a completely different context, can still speak to us today.
It really is, and it reminds us that the search for knowledge, the desire to understand the world and our place in it, is a timeless human pursuit.
Now, before we move on to explore Ibn Khaldun's ideas in even greater depth, I think it'll be helpful to take a step back and appreciate the sheer scope of his contributions. We've been throwing around terms like historiography and sociology, but I think it's worth unpacking what those terms mean and why Ibn Khaldun is considered such a pioneering figure in these fields.
Absolutely. It's easy to get lost in the details, but it's important to remember that Ibn Khaldun was doing something truly groundbreaking.
Yeah.
He wasn't just repeating what other scholars had said before him. He was forging new paths of inquiry, asking new questions, and developing new frameworks for understanding the world.
So let's start with historiography. I know it basically means the study of history, but what makes Ibn Khaldun's approach so unique?
Well, before Ibn Khaldun, most historical writing was focused on simply recounting events, listing dates, battles, the deeds of kings and conquerors.
Okay.
It was very much a chronological, this happened, then this happened kind of approach.
Okay, so it was more like a timeline of events without much analysis or interpretation.
Exactly. Ibn Khaldun wanted to go deeper.
Okay.
He was interested not just in what happened,
Right.
but why it happened. He wanted to understand the underlying causes of historical change, the patterns and motivations that drive human behavior.
So he was trying to figure out the why behind the what, like a detective searching for clues to solve a mystery.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And he believed that to truly understand history,
Yeah.
you had to look beyond the surface level of events and delve into the social, economic, and cultural forces that shape societies.
He was basically saying, hey, there's more to history than just kings and battles.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the people, the ideas, the structures that make up a civilization.
Precisely. And this was a radical departure from the way history was traditionally studied.
Wow.
He was introducing a whole new level of analysis, one that would have a profound impact on the development of historiography as a discipline.
So he was kind of like a trailblazer, paving the way for a more nuanced and insightful understanding of the past.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just history that he revolutionized. He's also considered a forerunner of modern sociology, the study of how societies function, how people interact, the structures and norms that shape our lives.
Now, sociology is a relatively modern field of study. How could Ibn Khaldun, writing in the 14th century, be considered a pioneer in this area?
Well, think about the topics he was exploring: social cohesion, group dynamics, urban life, the impact of the environment on culture, the interplay of power and legitimacy. These are all core themes in sociology, and he was analyzing them with incredible depth and insight.
It's like he was observing and analyzing the very fabric of society centuries before sociology became a formal discipline.
Exactly. He was asking questions like, how do societies form?
Right.
What holds them together? What causes them to decline? These are fundamental questions that sociologists continue to grapple with today.
And he wasn't just theorizing about these things. He was drawing on his real-world experiences, his observations of different cultures and societies, his understanding of human nature.
Precisely, he was able to connect the dots between individual behavior and large-scale social patterns in a way that was truly groundbreaking.
So he was not only a historian, but also a keen observer of human behavior and social dynamics.
Yes.
He was laying the foundation for a deeper understanding of how societies work.
Exactly, and it's these contributions that make him such an important figure in the history of ideas.
Right.
He wasn't just writing for his own time, he was grappling with questions that continue to resonate with us today.
I think it's also worth highlighting that Ibn Khaldun was a product of the Islamic Golden Age,
Yeah.
a period of incredible intellectual flourishing in the Islamic world.
You're right. This was a time of great scientific, artistic, and philosophical advancements. And Ibn Khaldun was one of the brightest stars of this era. His work reflects the dynamism and intellectual curiosity of that period.
It reminds us that the history of knowledge is not a linear progression from ancient Greece to modern Europe.
Nice.
It's a much more complex and interconnected story with contributions from diverse cultures and civilizations.
Absolutely. And Ibn Khaldun's work is a testament to the rich intellectual heritage of the Islamic world and its enduring contributions to human knowledge.
Now, before we move on to explore some of Ibn Khaldun's specific ideas in greater depth, I think it's important to address a question that often comes up when discussing his work, the question of his Eurocentrism.
That's a valid point. Some critics have argued that Ibn Khaldun's work reflects a Eurocentric bias, particularly in his geographical survey,
Okay.
where he connects climate and geography to the character of different peoples.
So the argument is that he's imposing a European perspective on other cultures and societies.
Yes, and that he's reinforcing certain stereotypes about non-European peoples. It's important to acknowledge these criticisms and to read his work with a critical eye.
Absolutely. It's crucial to be aware of the potential biases and limitations of any historical source, especially one written in a different time and cultural context.
And while we should be sensitive to these issues, I think it's also important to recognize that Ibn Khaldun was writing within the intellectual framework of his time.
Right.
He was trying to make sense of the world as he understood it, drawing on the knowledge and perspectives available to him.
So while we can critique his Eurocentrism, we also need to understand it in its historical context.
Exactly. It doesn't excuse his biases,
Right.
but it helps us to interpret his work more fairly and to appreciate the complexity of his thought.
I think that's a valuable reminder that no historical figure is perfect and that even the greatest thinkers can hold views that we find problematic today.
It's a challenge for us as readers to engage with these complex legacies, to appreciate their contributions while also acknowledging their flaws.
And it's a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is an ongoing process, a constant dialogue between the past, present, and future we learn from those who came before us, but we also bring our own perspectives and values to the table.
Exactly. It's a dynamic and evolving conversation. And I think Ibn Khaldun would have appreciated that he was a thinker who embraced complexity, challenged assumptions, and never stopped seeking deeper understanding.
Now, having laid this groundwork, let's delve into some of the specific concepts that Ibn Khaldun developed in the Muqaddimah.
Yeah.
We've already touched on Asabiyyah and the cyclical theory of history, but I want to explore these ideas in more depth, along with some of his other key insights.
I'm ready to dive in. Let's start with Asabiyyah, which is really at the heart of his theory of social change. Remember, it's this idea of group feeling solidarity, the kind of bond you see in a close-knit tribe or a team that's fighting for a common goal.
And he argued that Asabiyyah is what drives the formation of dynasties, right? It's like the fuel that powers their rise to power.
Exactly. He believed that without this strong sense of unity and shared purpose,
Right.
no group could achieve lasting political dominance. He saw Asabiyyah as the essential ingredient for overcoming challenges, mobilizing resources, and inspiring people to make sacrifices for the collective good.
It makes me think about those historical examples of small groups of people who were able to conquer vast empires like the Mongols under Genghis Khan or the early Muslims who spread their faith across the Middle East and North Africa.
Those are perfect examples. Ibn Khaldun would have pointed to those cases as evidence for the power of Asabiyyah. These were groups that may have lacked resources or numbers, but they had this incredible sense of unity, a willingness to fight and die for a common cause that allowed them to achieve what seemed impossible.
It's like that old saying, united we stand, divided we fall. Ibn Khaldun was basically saying that unity is the key to strength, both for individuals and for entire societies.
Right, and he believed that this unity was often forged through shared experiences, particularly hardship and struggle. He observed that nomadic tribes living in harsh environments where they had to rely on each other for survival
Right.
often had the strongest Asabiyyah.
So it's like going through tough times together can actually bring people closer.
Yeah.
That makes sense. When you face adversity as a group, you learn to depend on each other,
Yeah.
and that builds trust and loyalty.
Exactly, and he contrasted this with the weaker Asabiyyah he observed in more settled urban populations,
Right.
where people had more individual freedom and less reliance on the group for survival. It's like the comforts of civilization could, in a way, weaken those bonds.
It makes you wonder if there's a sweet spot, a balance between the benefits of civilization and the need to maintain that sense of shared struggle and purpose that Ibn Khaldun saw as so crucial.
That's a really interesting question, and it's something that I think a lot of societies are grappling with today. How do we create a world that offers security and opportunity while also fostering a sense of community and shared responsibility?
It's a big question, and one that I don't think has an easy answer, but Ibn Khaldun's insights definitely give us a lot to think about.
Absolutely. And one of his most thought-provoking ideas is his theory of the cyclical nature of dynasties.
Yes.
We've touched on this before, but I think it's worth exploring in more detail.
Okay, remind me, how does the cycle work again?
Well, Ibn Khaldun believed that all dynasties go through predictable phases,
Okay.
a kind of life cycle, if you will.
Mm.
It starts with the rise to power,
Uh-huh.
fueled by that strong Asabiyyah we've been talking about.
So it's like a group of ambitious, driven individuals united by a shared vision or goal who manage to overthrow the existing power structure and establish their own rule.
Exactly. They're hungry for power, willing to fight and make sacrifices, and they have that all-important Asabiyyah binding them together.
And what happens next? Once they've achieved their goal, do they just live happily ever after?
Not quite. Ibn Khaldun observed that once a dynasty consolidates its power,
Okay.
it enters a period of peace and prosperity.
Mm.
He called this the phase of leisure and tranquility.
So this is where they get to enjoy the fruits of their labor.
Yes.
They build palaces, indulge in luxury, maybe even become patrons of the arts.
Precisely. And this can be a golden age for a civilization.
Right.
But Ibn Khaldun argued that it's also during this phase that the seeds of decline begin to be sown.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. How does a period of peace and prosperity lead to decline?
He believed that the very comforts and luxuries that define this stage can start to erode the Asabiyyah that brought the dynasty to power in the first place.
So basically people get complacent,
Right.
lose their edge, and the bonds that once held them together start to weaken.
Exactly. The new generations born into privilege
Yeah.
may not have the same hunger and drive as their predecessors. They may become more individualistic, more focused on personal gain than on the collective good.
It's like that old saying, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard times.
That's a perfect summary. Ibn Khaldun was basically arguing that the very success of a dynasty can create the conditions for its eventual decline. It's a fascinating paradox.
And what happens next in this cycle? How does this decline manifest itself?
Well, Ibn Khaldun called the next phase the stage of wasting and squandering.
Okay.
The ruling dynasty, weakened by internal divisions and a lack of asabiyyah,
Yeah.
becomes less effective at governing and defending its territory.
So they become more focused on maintaining their own power and privilege than on serving the needs of the people.
Exactly. They may overspend, engage in corruption, and become increasingly isolated from the people they rule. And this makes them vulnerable to challenges from both within and outside the dynasty.
So they're ripe for the picking, either by a rival faction within the dynasty or by an external force looking to seize power.
Precisely. And this leads to the final stage of the cycle, the stage of senility and collapse.
So this is where the dynasty finally crumbles, unable to withstand the pressures that have been building up.
Exactly. They're overthrown either through internal rebellion or external conquest. And the cycle begins a new group, often with a strong sense of asabiyyah, and a hunger for power emerges to take their place.
It's a fascinating and somewhat sobering view of history.
It is.
It suggests that even the most powerful empires are ultimately subject to decline and fall.
Ibn Khaldun saw this pattern repeating throughout history. He believed that understanding this cycle was crucial for rulers who wanted to prolong the lifespan of their dynasties.
So he wasn't just interested in describing the patterns of history. He actually wanted to provide guidance on how to break free from them.
Exactly. He believed that by understanding the factors that contribute to decline, rulers could take steps to mitigate them and potentially extend their reign.
Did he have any specific advice on how to avoid this cyclical fate?
He did. He emphasized the importance of maintaining a strong sense of unity and purpose.
Okay.
Even during times of peace and prosperity, he advised rulers to be just and fair, to consult with wise advisors, to manage finances responsibly, and to avoid the temptations of excessive luxury and indulgence.
So it's about staying vigilant, remembering the values that brought you to power, and governing for the benefit of all, not just for the enrichment of the elite.
That's it. In a nutshell, he believed that by following these principles,
Right.
rulers could create a more stable and enduring society, one that could withstand the inevitable challenges that time brings.
It's amazing how these insights formulated centuries ago still resonate today. They offer valuable lessons for leaders in all spheres of life, from politics and business to community organizing and even personal development.
Absolutely. Ibn Khaldun's work reminds us that success is not a destination, it's a journey, and to stay on the path to success. We need to be constantly aware of the forces that can lead to decline, and we need to be intentional about cultivating the values and practices that will keep us strong and resilient.
Now, before we move on to explore Ibn Khaldun's other key insights, I want to take a moment to appreciate how he was able to develop such a sophisticated understanding of history and society. It wasn't just his experiences in politics or his vast reading, it was also his deep engagement with the world around him, his keen observations of human behavior, and his willingness to connect the dots between seemingly disparate phenomena.
You're right. He was a true interdisciplinary thinker, way ahead of his time. And I
Yeah.
think that's one of the reasons his work continues to fascinate and inspire readers today.
Right.
He reminds us that knowledge is interconnected, that to truly understand the world, we need to be able to see the bigger picture,
Yes.
and that sometimes the most profound insights come from looking at things from a fresh perspective.
Now, in addition to his groundbreaking work on history and social theory, Ibn Khaldun also made significant contributions to the field of economics. I know we touched on this earlier, but I want to delve deeper into his economic thought and explore how his ideas can shed light on contemporary economic issues.
I'm happy to dive in. One of the things that makes Ibn Khaldun's economic thought so fascinating is that he was writing centuries before the development of modern economics as a formal discipline, yet he was able to observe and analyze the basic principles that govern economic activity in a way that is still remarkably relevant today.
So he was essentially an economic proto-thinker, laying the groundwork for later economists like Adam Smith and Karl Marx.
Exactly. He was observing the world around him,
Uh-huh.
seeing how people exchanged goods and services, how markets functioned, how governments influenced economic activity,
Yeah.
and he was drawing conclusions about the factors that contribute to prosperity or decline.
It's like he was conducting these economic experiments in his mind, trying to figure out what made societies tick.
That's a great way to put it. And one of his key insights was the importance of trade as a driver of economic growth.
Okay.
He saw trade as essential for the circulation of goods and ideas, for stimulating innovation, and for creating opportunities for wealth creation.
So he was a big believer in the free flow of goods and ideas across borders.
He was.
That's a very modern, globalized perspective.
It is, and he even went so far as to say that a lack of trade could lead to the decline of a civilization.
Wow.
He believed that societies that closed themselves off from the outside world would stagnate both economically and intellectually.
That's a pretty powerful statement. It makes you wonder if there are any parallels to today's world with the rise of protectionism and the backlash against globalization.
It's a thought-provoking question. Ibn Khaldun's insights definitely make us think about the potential costs of economic isolationism and the importance of maintaining open and vibrant connections between different parts of the world.
Now, in addition to trade, what other economic principles did he explore?
He was fascinated by the concept of the division of labor. The idea that when people specialize in different tasks and skills, they
Right.
can produce goods and services more efficiently. He saw this as a key driver of economic progress and prosperity.
So he was basically observing the benefits of specialization and how it can lead to greater productivity. That's a fundamental principle in economics.
It is, and he also understood the importance of a stable currency. We touched on this earlier, but it's worth emphasizing how prescient his insights were on this issue.
Yeah, his warnings about inflation and the dangers of a fluctuating currency feel incredibly relevant today given the economic uncertainties we're facing.
Exactly. He saw how a stable currency was essential for facilitating trade, for building trust in markets, and for ensuring economic stability.
And did he have any thoughts on the role of government in the economy?
He did. He believed that governments played a crucial role in creating the conditions for economic prosperity, but he was also wary of excessive government intervention.
So it's about finding that balance between regulation and free markets?
Exactly. He stressed the importance of fair taxation, arguing that excessive taxes could stifle economic activity and discourage investment. He also believed that governments should focus on providing essential public goods, like infrastructure and security, that would facilitate trade and commerce.
So he was advocating for a kind of hands-off approach to the economy, but with a recognition that governments had a role to play in creating a stable and supportive environment for business.
That's a good summary. He understood that there was a delicate balance to be struck and that too much or too little government intervention could be harmful to economic growth.
It's amazing how he was able to develop these nuanced economic insights centuries before the development of modern economic theory.
It is, and it's a testament to his keen observational skills, his analytical mind, and his ability to connect the dots between seemingly disparate phenomena.
Now, before we move on to our final segment, I want to touch upon one more aspect of Ibn Khaldun's thought that I find particularly fascinating, his views on the nature of knowledge itself.
Ah, yes, he was deeply interested in epistemology, the study of how we know what we know, and he dedicated a significant portion of the Muqaddimah to exploring this topic.
So he wasn't just a historian, a sociologist, and an economist. He was also a philosopher of knowledge.
He was, and one of his key insights was the importance of evidence-based reasoning.
Okay.
He believed that knowledge should be grounded in empirical observation, logical deduction, and critical thinking.
That sounds very much like the scientific method.
It does, doesn't it? And it's remarkable that he was advocating for this kind of rigorous approach to knowledge acquisition centuries before the scientific revolution in Europe.
So he was a true intellectual trailblazer, challenging the traditional ways of thinking and paving the way for a more rational and evidence-based approach to understanding the world.
Exactly. And he wasn't just interested in acquiring knowledge for its own sake.
Wow.
He believed that knowledge was essential for solving practical problems, for making sound judgments, and for living a good life.
So he saw knowledge as a powerful tool for individual and societal progress.
He did. And he believed that education was the key to unlocking this power. He saw a well-rounded education as essential for developing critical thinking skills, for fostering creativity, and for preparing individuals to be responsible and engaged citizens.
It's a message that resonates deeply with me. I think we often take for granted the importance of education and its role in shaping our lives and our societies.
It's true, and Ibn Khaldun's work reminds us that the pursuit of knowledge is a lifelong journey, one that can enrich our lives, empower us to make a difference in the world, and help us to create a better future.
Now, before we wrap up this segment and move on to our final thoughts on Ibn Khaldun's legacy, I want to quickly recap the key points we've covered so far.
A good recap can help us to consolidate our understanding and appreciate the breadth and depth of his thought.
We started by exploring his concept of Asabiyyah,
Yes.
highlighting how this sense of group, feeling solidarity, and shared purpose is essential for the formation and success of dynasties.
We then delved into his cyclical theory of history, tracing the predictable phases that all dynasties go through, from their rise to power to their eventual decline and collapse.
We also touched upon his economic insights, highlighting his understanding of the importance of trade,
Right.
the division of labor, a stable currency, and the role of government in creating a supportive environment for economic activity.
And finally, we explored his views on the nature of knowledge, emphasizing his belief in evidence-based reasoning, the importance of critical thinking, and the power of education to transform individuals and societies.
Excellent summary. It really captures the key elements of Ibn Khaldun's thought and his enduring contributions to our understanding of history, society, and the human condition.
It's been a whirlwind tour through his ideas, and I feel like we've only scratched the surface, but it's amazing how much ground he covered and how relevant so many of his observations still are today.
That's what's blowing my mind. So we're talking about a guy who was writing in the 14th century, and yet his work feels incredibly modern in so many ways. It's like he was able to tap into some fundamental truths about human nature and how societies work that transcend time and place.
He was definitely ahead of his time, and I think that's one of the reasons why he's considered such a giant in the history of ideas. He wasn't just repeating what others had said before him. He was forging his own path, asking new questions, challenging assumptions, and developing these incredibly insightful frameworks for understanding the world.
It makes you wonder what he would make of the world today with all its complexities and challenges. I mean, could his ideas really help us make sense of things like globalization, technological advancements, the rise of social media, all these things that he could never have imagined?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And while we can't know for sure what Ibn Khaldun would think of our modern world, I do believe that his insights can offer valuable perspectives on some of the most pressing issues we face today.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me some examples. How can we connect his 14th century wisdom to our 21st century problems?
Well, let's take the example of political polarization, something that feels incredibly intense these days. Remember Ibn Khaldun's concept of Asabiyyah? He talked about how this strong group feeling could be incredibly powerful, but also potentially divisive if it wasn't channeled in constructive ways.
So are you saying that the intense loyalty people feel towards their political parties or even towards certain ideologies or social movements is a form of asabiyyah.
Exactly. And just like Ibn Khaldun observed in his time, that kind of asabiyyah can be a force for good. It can bring people together to achieve common goals and create positive change, but it can also lead to conflict and division if it becomes too rigid, too intolerant of opposing viewpoints.
It's like that saying, there's strength in numbers, but also danger in crowds. Ibn Khaldun was basically warning us about the potential downsides of groupthink even centuries ago.
Right. And I think that's a lesson we need to remember today. It's important to have strong convictions to stand up for what you believe in, but it's also crucial to be open to dialogue, to listen to other perspectives, to try to understand where people are coming from, even if you disagree with them.
It's about finding that balance between passion and reason, between standing your ground and being willing to bridge divides.
Exactly. And I think that's something that Ibn Khaldun would have appreciated. He was a thinker who embraced complexity, who understood that there are rarely easy answers, and who believed in the importance of seeking truth through dialogue and critical thinking.
Okay, so that's one example of how his ideas can be applied to a modern issue. What about something like economic inequality? A huge concern for many people these days. Can Ibn Khaldun's work shed any light on that?
Absolutely. Remember his discussion of the cyclical nature of dynasties and how luxury and ease could lead to decline? He observed that when societies become too focused on material wealth and individual gain, it can erode the social fabric and create conditions for instability.
So he's basically saying that a society that's obsessed with wealth and status is ultimately a society that's sowing the seeds of its own destruction.
That's a good way to put it. He believed that true prosperity came not just from material wealth, but also from social cohesion, a sense of shared purpose, and a commitment to justice and the common good.
It's like he's reminding us that a society is more than just an economy. It's a complex web of relationships, values, and institutions that all need to be working in harmony for things to function smoothly.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important message for us today as we grapple with the challenges of globalization, technological advancements, and the increasing concentration of wealth and power.
It's a reminder that economic policies and social values need to be aligned, that we can't just focus on maximizing profits or GDP without considering the impact on people and communities.
Right. And Ibn Khaldun would probably say that we need to be more intentional about cultivating the values and practices that will create a more just and equitable society. Things like empathy, compassion, cooperation, and a willingness to share resources and opportunities.
It's like he's urging us to think beyond our own immediate self-interest and to consider the well-being of the whole.
Exactly. And that's a message that resonates deeply with me. It's a call for a more humane and holistic approach to economics, one that recognizes the interconnectedness of our lives and the importance of creating a world that works for everyone, not just for a privileged few.
Now, as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of Ibn Khaldun, I want to leave our listeners with a few final thoughts.
It's been an incredible journey exploring the mind of this brilliant and insightful thinker.
Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah is a challenging read, but it's also an incredibly rewarding one. It offers a unique perspective on the patterns of history, the dynamics of power, the complexities of human nature, and the possibilities for creating a better future.
And while his work was written centuries ago in a very different context, his insights remain remarkably relevant to the challenges we face today.
He reminds us that the past is not just a collection of dates and events, but a source of wisdom and guidance that can help us to navigate the complexities of the present and to shape a more just and sustainable future.
His work challenges us to think critically, to question assumptions, to connect the dots between different fields of knowledge, and to never stop seeking deeper understanding.
And most importantly, it reminds us that we are not passive observers of history, but active participants in shaping its course. The choices we make today will determine the world we leave for future generations.
So let's learn from Ibn Khaldun's insights, embrace the complexity of our world, and work together to create a future that is worthy of his legacy, a future marked by justice, prosperity, and a profound respect for the dignity of every human being.
Thank you for joining us on this intellectual adventure. We hope it's inspired you to dive deeper into the world of Ibn Khaldun and to see how his ideas can illuminate your own understanding of the world. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking truth.